When the most powerful man in the world lost access to his bank accounts, something unexpected began to take shape. A shadow financial empire quietly started to rise. There was a time when banks simply held your money, standing as neutral custodians. But over the years, that role quietly shifted, and they became gatekeepers, deciding who deserves access to civic and economic life. Over 300 Trump Organization accounts were shuttered by Capital One following an internal anti-money laundering review. Then, days after January 6th, J.P. Morgan followed suit and cut ties as well. The closures happened, the AML reviews happened, the lawsuits happened too, but the internal records that could reveal the true motive, those remain locked away, hidden from public view. There's no law called debanking. It's a political label, a commercial reality, and banks hold near total discretion to simply walk away. The public never sees the transaction data, the alert histories, or the compliance memos. They only see the bank's polished final statement. And that information gap is not accidental. It is structural. The language of anti-money laundering sounds neutral, objective, almost clinical, yet it hands banks a quiet shield. They never have to accuse you of a crime to shut you down. Capital One never actually accused Trump of money laundering. They simply decided the risk was too great, and that alone was enough to close every door. Then came January 6th, and afterward, corporations scrambled to sever politically radioactive ties. The pretense that compliance and politics could be kept neatly apart collapsed almost overnight. When a politically destabilizing event unfolds, it can quietly reshape how a bank measures the future burden of keeping a customer, even when the paperwork speaks only of neutral compliance. Trump's real genius wasn't in fighting the closures, but in reframing them. He took an institutional conflict and turned it into proof that the financial establishment was aligned against anyone who dared to challenge the system. By 2025, the man who once claimed he was silenced by banks now held the power of the presidency, and he wielded it, signing an executive order to bar discriminatory debanking across the nation. When the most powerful elected official in the world can be cut off by financial institutions no one voted for, it raises a deeper question about who truly holds power in America. When debanking takes hold, its effects ripple outward in 4 distinct ways. Narratives harden, policies escalate, institutions grow fearful, and then democracy itself bends under the weight of financial exclusion. When politicians push harder to ban debanking, banks respond by retreating. They avoid any politically exposed client entirely, and so the very exclusion they sought to end only deepens further. Now banks find themselves caught in an impossible dilemma. If they keep a polarizing client, they invite regulatory scrutiny. But if they close the account, they face lawsuits claiming political discrimination. Either path carries a real cost. When financial infrastructure becomes a weapon, the powerful don't just complain. They build parallel rails, seeking out ideologically aligned capital pools that sit beyond the reach of traditional gatekeepers. Then the Trump family shifted from financial exclusion to building a crypto empire. In a single year, they generated at least $2.3 billion in value and over $1.4 billion in income. World Liberty Financial took the story of being shut out by elite banks and turned it into the foundation of a new financial product. Grievance became the marketing pitch. As Trump kept insisting that banks were discriminating against him, something shifted. his family-branded crypto alternative began to feel not just plausible, but genuinely necessary to his supporters. And so the debanking grievance and the crypto business model fit together with uncanny precision. One supplies the moral drama, while the other supplies the monetization. The right denounces banks as politically biased, and yet, rather than demanding public service obligations, they build partisan alternatives in crypto. This exposes a contradiction at the very center of the movement. The Trump crypto ecosystem sells rebellion against the establishment, yet its branding and economics remain tightly centralized. And so the real project isn't dismantling the system, it's controlling the access terms. But Trump's story is far from unique. Crypto firms, firearms companies, controversial nonprofits, and migrant communities have all felt that same invisible hand of financial exclusion. Then, the Trump dispute forced open a question America had long avoided. Should basic banking function as a near-public utility, accessible to every lawful business and political actor? When a customer turns radioactive, compliance, reputation, and politics fuse together so completely that isolating any single motive becomes nearly impossible for anyone outside the bank's inner walls. Banks speak of risk and compliance, while politicians cry discrimination and censorship. And so the public hears both languages, trusting neither one completely. And so, the Trump family's crypto empire emerged as an entrepreneurial answer to debanking, whether born of genuine necessity, raw opportunism, or perhaps something far more calculated in between. The old system had the power to exclude, so the new strategy was to profit by building around it, forging a political identity while extracting wealth at the same time. And so, the questions they don't want asked remain. If you want to keep following this trail, subscribe to Smoke and Mirrors on Substack and stay on the case as we trace the financial powers shaping our world.